Welcome to NaNoWriMo 2022 vlog part 2 by me, Shaylin. I wrote something good last night. What is happening? So if you've been following along with this journey thus far, which if you haven't, there's context, watch part 1. I've been struggling with my book for months. And I decided that the way that I was going to try and break out of this struggle was to do NaNoWriMo. I thought, you know, it's not working, so let's just do some intensive writing for 1 month. There's a lot of context. I have 2 videos where I basically just talk about why it was going so bad. Yesterday, the past few days, I had honestly been really losing hope with this book. I'd started to feel like it just wasn't gonna work out. And I was preparing to basically put it aside. But yesterday, I wrote something that I like. I was editing back my first part of the vlog. I was talking about how there were a bunch of threads in this book that I'd essentially dropped, and I realized that I could pull one of the threads in, and that kind of just set off a chain of events. And one thing that I've been struggling with this book is that it's like I couldn't get a causal chain to begin. I felt like I just had isolated scenes of characters talking with each other, but no sense of plot or causality. I know that I know better than this, you know? I know that I know how writing craft works. I know that I have a better understanding of writing craft than I'm executing in this book, and that was really frustrating. And I feel like all of a sudden I've tapped into a sense of motion and causality that I haven't had before. Can I keep it up? I don't know, but I'm hoping that since I've kind of kickstarted a sense of motion, I need to just try and follow that. There hasn't been any momentum to the story for the past few chapters, and that's why I've been struggling, because any time I sit down to write, it's like I don't know what happens next because nothing really needs to happen. But all of a sudden there's plot, there's causality, and I really liked what I wrote yesterday. Now that I feel like I've tapped into something, I need to do everything to maintain it. I don't know, I don't want to celebrate too soon, but I actually am feeling good. Still do have a lot of beef with this book and a lot of things that I think need attention. This is what I've been looking for, is a sense of movement to the plot. I feel like I have that now, and now I'm just excited to follow it and hope that it keeps going and doesn't just like fizzle out in like 2 scenes. That would suck. So it's Thursday the 10th. The past 3 days of writing have been good. Also, just ignore the sound of the washing machine in the background. It's very loud. I don't know what's going on, but I feel like this book is starting to work. For a long time, the scenes didn't feel like rich at all. Like they were just really flat, and there wasn't really much like intrigue or context or backstory or emotion or anything. Yesterday, I just wrote a flashback, but I really liked it. I realized one scene that I could add, which in the grand scheme of things is such a small scene, but if we're looking at this book from like a traditional like structure, like Save the Cat, which I'm not using, that would be like the break into 2 beat, which makes sense because I think the book will be maybe around 7 parts, each part being 3 to 4 chapters, 10 to 12k words. I added in this little scene. It's super small, but it feels really pivotal to be the last scene of part 2. And so I feel like that was kind of the end of the first act. And now I've gotten into like the middle of the book. It started a domino effect. And I feel like I've been following that for the past few scenes. And even though like the scene I wrote yesterday was a flashback, it fit in like this emotional chain of causality perfectly. I wanted to add one reason why I think these scenes, the past few scenes that I've written, are better is because they're getting more internal. The first 2 chapters, especially the first chapter, are my favorite parts of the book, and they're very internal. I think that one of the most compelling aspects of this story is my main character's internal narrative, because they're a very chaotic, turbulent person. Those first few chapters were really strong, in part because it was a lot of just thinking. Obviously, like the character interactions are really important, but I think that a lot of the scenes maybe start to get too drawn out. There was a scene that I really liked, the scene that I wrote between my main character and this other character named Elliot. And it's a very interesting relationship, and I like their dynamic, and I like him as a character. In previous interactions they've had, it's just gotten very drawn out, and I didn't like the scenes. But this past scene that I had with them, there was like maybe 1 or 2 lines of dialogue embedded in this scene. And I felt like it was really concise, and it had really good sense of rhythm, and it really got into how my main character felt in this situation. I think that like Rowan and Susanna need to have at certain points like some longer conversations. See if I can compress the book and compress the scenes more, because that scene that I wrote the other day that was really compressed was way better because it was really compressed. I felt like it had way more tension and it just feels way more explosive, and the writing itself was way better. This is going so well. I don't know, I just feel like such a dramatic change in my view towards the book, and I've really just been thinking about what I did differently and why it's working so well compared to like last week. I've obviously made like a lot of videos, well now 3 videos, about how this book was a giant hot mess. Obviously when you do that, people will give you advice. One comment that I just really want to highlight, because this genius, I literally saved this in a note on my phone. Sometimes you can fix the feel of a novel by doing some tinkering with dynamics between characters. Is there a relationship that feels a little off? Does it need more clarity, less clarity, more secrets, more drama, tragedy, tenderness, toxicity, etc.? That genius, your mind. One thing that I got a lot of comments was people saying, just put it aside. It's fine to put it aside. It's fine to take a break. And I totally get why you would say that, because I think that's what I would say to me, right? If someone came to me and they're like, what do I do? My book is killing me. I would be like, bestie, chill, come back to it later. But I don't think this problem would have fixed itself if I took a break. If the problem is with you, then you should take a break. Like if it's burnout, if it's personal stuff, whatever, then you want to take a break, because fixing it is going to be from you. It's not the book. But if the problem is with the book, then I think you have to write through it. Like taking a break doesn't do anything, because when you come back, the problem's still there. You know, this isn't always the case. But I think I knew that if I were to put this book aside, I would maybe not come back. Only thing keeping me going was that I had said I was going to write it every day for a month, and I felt like I had to give it its chance to become better and fix the problems before I put it aside. And I am so happy that I gave it that chance, because it is going so well and I actually am loving what I'm writing. I just want to talk about the few things that I did that really changed this book. So the first one is, and I talked about this previously, was earlier in the book the scenes were really short and very internal. They were almost vignettes, but they started getting really long and drawn out as I added more characters, because in the first chapter of the book there are no other characters. It's just the protagonist. That first chapter, which is so good, is literally just the main character. And so as I was adding more characters, I felt like the scenes were getting so drawn out, and so I tried to pull them back in, because I was initially inspired by 2 books for the style, Luster by Raven Leilani and The Lightness by Emily Timble. 2 fantastic books. Luster was like one of my 2 favorite reads from 2020. The Lightness was one of my 2 favorite reads from 2021. When I was reading both of them, I was so enamored with the scene structure, because they're both not quite vignettes. They'll have like some longer scenes, but they use a lot of really short scenes that are so punchy and really internal. I'm loving the scenes now that I'm pulling them in. They're like shorter but way richer. Also, I'm trying to let the book go to flashback more. And I feel like this is funny, because I feel like in my short stories there will be a lot of flashbacks. Like I will write a short story with 6 scenes and it'll have 2 flashbacks or 3 flashbacks, right? In like a whole novel though, like Honey Vinegar I think has 2 flashbacks in it. And part of that is just because the main character is so young when it starts, but it's not my instinct as a novelist. I'm trying to look at the scenes more like I would if it was a short story, because I feel like in a short story the scene is less about the present and more about the past. Like it's more about unpacking everything that has brought them to this point. The past and Roman's upbringing are really important. It is very much about the relationships in the present, but it's also about how they're using relationships in the present as like proxies for relationships from their past. In the setting, they were basically just stuck in one house with nowhere to go and nothing to do, and so it felt so inactive. And so I feel like diving into the past more has really made the scenes more engaging. The other thing, and I talked about this in my first vlog, is I've been trying to focus on picking at Rowan's vulnerabilities. Like I really asked myself, like, what is tender or vulnerable about this character? Because when I read back this book, it made me feel nothing. It's like they didn't have any tender aspects to them, and so I didn't feel anything for this character. You know, they are quite jaded and selfish, but also quite confident, and so they don't come across as like someone that you necessarily feel for really initially. But I've really been trying to uncover like the sadness underneath them and the yearning. The more I pick at that, the more, again, like I feel like the book makes me feel stuff again. And then obviously I've talked about like kickstarting a causal chain was so important. And then yeah, the other thing I want to do that I haven't really started doing but want to look to in the next few chapters is to use my setting more. At the moment I feel like I have gotten too enclosed. There's nothing for the character to do. Like it's set on a house on an island, and I feel like I've boiled the setting down to the house rather than viewing the setting as the island. Those are kind of the things that I've been doing, and some of them are really small adjustments, and I really have been loving what I've been writing lately, and I've just been focusing on trying to write scenes and making them as engaging as possible. Just on a little walk and someone's sawing something, just ignore it. I'm really enjoying what I'm writing. I definitely haven't been writing a ton each day. I feel like I write like 300 to 400 words a day, which is pretty low for me. And I remember this happening actually when I did NaNoWriMo in 2020. Writing was going super well, but because I was writing every single day, I was writing less. Like, I really honestly don't care about the word output for the month. I really just wanted to get my book back on track. Yesterday, I started one of those like longer scenes that I was kind of talking about, and it kind of went a direction I wasn't really anticipating, though to be fair, I didn't really have the direction planned. I think I'm kind of, not reserving, but for the most part, want to keep the longer scenes to the conversations between Rowan and Suze, because I feel like, again, that is like the core developing relationship in the book. In a certain way, like slow the pace down in these moments, but also to put some weight there. But I had been thinking about how I want to think more about Suze's past. I'm writing from a limited first-person narrator's perspective. I often don't really do a lot of character development beyond what my character knows. Like, I kind of learn about the side characters as my protagonist meets the side characters. With Suze, like, I had a very clear sense of her personality and her kind of like her vibe as a character. Find her very easy to write. I hadn't actually given too much thought to like her upbringing, her past, so that's something that I think I'm going to explore more in this scene. I actually had the two of them kind of get into an argument, which wasn't planned. I think I actually have tapped into some interesting stuff about Suze and her character and her past and her backstory. I've been working on some character development for Rowan. I feel like Rowan is such a developed character in the sense of like, I understand them and I understand how they tick and how they work. I want to dive more into the past because I feel like that's a really important thing. I feel like Rowan's relationship with their parents is so key. Once I'm done that for Rowan, I'll probably start doing the same exercise for Suze, and then probably after that the same one for Cody. I do feel like Cody needs it the most. I struggle the most to write his scenes. Rowan and Suze are really easy to write. They were the two like initial characters in this book. And another thing that I want to put more work into like developing on the page is like the Cody Susanna relationship, because I view most books as having like a key relationship that the book focuses around. So in this book it's Rowan and Suze, but also I actually think that in a lot of cases it's not just that, it's also a triangle, a key relationship that my protagonist has. So in this case Rowan with Susanna, but then there's another character who also has a key relationship with that other character and also has an important relationship with my protagonist. That triangle is actually really important for causing tension, and I feel like in this case I really want to look at the Susanna and Cody relationship, and Rowan observing that relationship is really important because Rowan is, I think, very intrigued by that relationship, and that relationship, even though Rowan's not a part of it, is so important. It's just a character exercise that I think I've talked about it before. It's just a list of character development questions that a writing prof that I had gave me, and I've come back to them time and time again. It's not like a character profile. To be honest, I hate character profiles. I think that character profiles are useful for like keeping track of information. I don't think that filling out a character profile where it's like, what's your main character's birthday, that does nothing for me, right? If that works for you, like, you do you, right? But for me, that does nothing. So for me, biographical data is not that important. For me, what's important character development work is like getting deep into fears and wants and really key moments from their life. And so these questions that my prof gave me are like really helpful, I find, for that. I find that these questions are pretty helpful for developing specific moments, like that the way you're supposed to answer them is in first person and kind of try to pull like moments and memories and answer each of them as like an internal monologue. I started doing these questions for Rowan in a Readsy webinar earlier in the year. One of the questions is like, have you had any pets or something? I ended up directly pulling in the answer that I wrote directly into the book. It's the end of a chapter. You know, some of it is biographical. It starts with biographical data, but it kind of asks you to look at biographical data as a narrative. One of the first questions, I don't remember, is to describe what you look like, instead of just writing in a character profile like eye color. Instead, it's like, describe yourself. How do you see yourself? I really like this set of questions. I don't do it for every character, but I do it when I need it. As the writer, when I write from a limited perspective, I usually only know about the side characters what my protagonist knows. I think it can almost help that I am limited by the limits of my POV character, but sometimes I also get to a point where I'm like, okay, I need to step outside this a little bit. The scene kind of went a route I wasn't expecting. I had the two of them kind of get in an argument. So far, the tone of their interactions has been kind of like civil but insidious, I guess. So far, the tension has been from their attraction, not from their disagreement. And the reason I was never really expecting their interactions to go to a place of like argument is because it's just so against Rowan's goals for this relationship. I think it's going to be a really actually important turning point, and I think that first of all, it'll just give some texture to their conversations so that they don't all kind of feel the same tonally. But I think it'll also complicate like kind of the emotional stakes, because I think for Rowan, this scene will really like humanize Suze, which I think Like, Rowan is attracted to Suze and compelled by her. I don't think Rowan really sees Suze as like a person that they have to like sympathize with. I think Rowan views Suze almost as like a prize, kind of, in a way. So I think that this scene will kind of force Rowan to like unwittingly humanize her, which I think will like complicate their further interactions and further dynamics a lot. I think what's interesting about Suze as a character is kind of her facade, and she can come across as a little shallow. It's absolutely intentional. I've been talking about Rowan, how I felt one of the keys to tapping into this book was how do I pick at their vulnerabilities, and I actually think I have to do the same with Suze, and I think that that's gonna add like a really interesting texture to the most important relationship. The two of them come across as very different types of people. Like, you know, Susanna gives off this like horse girl, country club, very like wealthy upbringing, whereas Rowan is like a little rat you found in a gutter. Fundamentally, there's a lot that they have in common about how they use people and how they manipulate people. On the surface, they go about it in very different ways. And I think that that's why it's a very destructive relationship. And I also think that's why they're drawn to each other. There's an earlier scene where Rowan even says like, would be a novelty to her. I think they're attracted because of their differences, but I think really they're very, unfortunately, attracted to each other because of some traits they have that are very much the same. I'm just gonna finish up my little walk and listen to my little writing playlist, which I keep meaning to say this. If you're curious what I listen to, I will link my Spotify. I have one for Saltbirds, and I have one for Honey Vinegar, and I have one for Holding You Ghost. So music is such an important part of my writing process that when I'm trying to be in the mindset of a specific book, I really try to listen to the playlist for that book. So we're more than halfway through NaNoWriMo. It's the 16th, so you should be at like what? Almost 27,000? I've written about 8,500. I'm like what, 19,000 words behind? I literally can't believe that I used to do full NaNoWriMos. The full 50,000. Wild. I'm currently wrapping up chapter 8. I kind of talked about how I kind of had kickstarted a causal chain. I feel like I'm nearing the end, obviously not of that causal chain, but of kind of where I know that causal chain needs to go. So I honestly don't really know where I should be going next, or what should be happening next, or what I should be doing next. This was something that going into this book, I really told myself I was gonna do. I really told myself anytime I get stuck, or not even when I'm stuck, at every scene, I'm really gonna ask myself what needs to happen, and I'm really gonna be very intentional in how I move forward. I don't want the book to go off track. I don't want to go on tangents. A lot of lessons that I learned from Honey Vinegar about pacing and plotting, I'm gonna take all of that and I'm gonna apply it on the first draft, and I'm not gonna mess it up. But that's all very much easier said than done. I think that's what this book has been teaching me more than anything, that knowing how to write a book, knowing how to write a good book, having written a good book before, having a really good understanding of writing craft doesn't make the process easy. It can almost make the process harder because you're thinking of so many things. There's definitely been a level of overthinking, I would say. I really want to be very careful and very intentional about how I move forward, because I feel like before I had kind of gotten a chain of events in motion, it was hard to really do this, even though this was something I'd said I was going to do going into the book, be very careful about my chain of events and causality. It was hard to do because I think through the second part of the book, it was a lot of introducing characters, and there wasn't really a chain of events, to be honest. I need to edit that part of the book. Now that I feel like there's kind of a chain of events in motion, I do really want to be careful not to derail it, and that's really my priority rather than writing a ton of words, you know? It was so hard to get the book to this place where the pieces were actually moving. I really don't want to lose that. Hello, it's like 9 o'clock at night, but I just thought I would film this before I forget the thoughts that are currently in my brain. I did a couple hours of writing today, but very little in the actual draft. I basically just capped off the chapter just so that it was like 300 words basically. I spent most of the day finishing up that character development exercise for Rowan. Honestly, I think that was a really good use of my time, because quite a few of the questions I feel like I could just directly plop into the book at some point. I mean, obviously with like a little editing for context and stuff. The whole point of this exercise is that in the question, you don't really necessarily acknowledge the question. You write every question as if it was like a block of internal narrative. It can stand alone without the question in a lot of cases. So going through them, the first one, where were you born? I don't need to include that. What jobs did your parents hold? I mean, that's good information, but I'm not going to include like the answer. The next one is a physical description. I already have a physical description. What is your favorite music and why? I don't think I'm going to include that one, even though I do like the answer. What pet, if any, did you have growing up? That one I've actually already included in the book. If you built a house, what would it look like and where would it be? I don't think I'm gonna include that one. What clothes are you wearing right now? Why are you dressed that way? Don't think I'll include that one just because I think it kind of taps into things that have already been explored about like gender and stuff. What foods do you like to eat? Don't think I'll include that one. If you were caught in an extreme fire, what would you fear most? Normally I try to go pretty in depth, but that one, it was a very short answer that I think maybe I'll use the line, honestly. But it's not like a long paragraph I can include. What is the most common mistake people make about you? My answer that I gave for that one isn't necessarily like an anecdote or anything, but I could see myself including it. If you were to plant a tree in honor of your father, what kind would you plant? I've always found this to be the strangest question in the exercise, but I actually included it. I put it as my little ending for chapter 8. What do you regret most? This question generated basically a whole flashback for me, which I've been wanting to go deeper into Rowan and Cody's past as children. Who has taught you the most about happiness? What did you learn? How did they teach you? I think I'm gonna just directly plop that one into the book, basically as is. What do you usually do on Sunday mornings? Probably won't include that one. What drugs, if any, do you use? I think I'm also going to directly just plop that into the book. I've done this exercise for several times because I had a prof who made us do this like for multiple different classes. So I think I've done this exercise for 3 different times while in school, and then I've done it several times out of school. But I think this is the first time that I've done it for a character who enjoys doing a lot of drugs. So I'll probably, again, directly plop that into the book. And then where in the world have you traveled? The answer to that was they haven't traveled anywhere. So yeah, next up, I would just want to do this question for Suze and then for Cody. I would say other than those 3, the other main characters, Meredith, I'm not going to do this for Meredith because Meredith is a very important character. It's not like we're really unpacking her psyche. Actually, do you think it would be interesting to do this for Elliot? Because I actually don't know that much about his past and his life, and I feel like it would be good to get some sense of like some things for him and Rowan to talk about. The last main character in the book, Raymond, who is this just weird guy that Rowan meets and starts kind of visiting. I might do that for him. The thing about Elliot, Raymond, and Suze is that all 3 of those 3 characters just have a lot of conversations with my protagonist. And so I think it would actually be good to generate some material of things for them to talk about, especially because they would have parallel questions that I've already answered for Rowan. Normally I don't answer these questions for all the characters in a book. Normally it's like maybe one character who I feel like I need it for. Like for Holding a Ghost, I only did this question set for Nadia, and it's just because there was a chapter in that book where I basically had to go through her entire life story. I feel like because this book has so many conversations. I just read a book, and I think this is a perfect example of what I'm trying to avoid. I just read These Impossible Things by Salma El-Wardani. One thing that I noticed in this book that I have noticed in other books, but this is just the one that's coming to mind because I just read it, is that every conversation the characters have is kind of directly about what the themes and topics of the story is. You know, that's a book that's about like 3 women navigating their faith affects their relationships. Most of the conversations that the characters have are directly talking about how their faith affects their relationships. The book seems so aware that it's a book because the characters only ever talk about things that are like directly relevant to the themes. I mean, and I see why as an author you do that because you think, yeah, I'm gonna be very purposeful, right? Like everything's gonna be related. I'm sure that these people have other things that they talk about in their lives. Like, do they only ever talk about this one thing? Like, I'm sure that they have other things going on. I'm sure that they're more multifaceted than this. I felt like it kind of impeded a lot of potential character development. In my book, this is, like I said, it's very relationship driven. I do need to have a certain number of scenes where characters are essentially talking about unrelated things, and that dialogue, even though it's about something that is unrelated to the main themes or topics of the book, is developing the relationships, unpacking interesting things that we want to learn about these relationships, you know, kind of as a show don't tell. So rather than having them talk about whatever it is that is being explored in the scene, the dialogue is a form of showing, right? I have started thinking in this past scene, thinking more about Suze's backstory, and so that's something I'm really interested to explore. Cody's backstory, I definitely want to put a lot more work into. So anyways, that's just to say that this was definitely a great use of my time. Whenever my prof would make us do this exercise, she would always say that what she liked about this exercise is that you can remove the questions and then just read the answers all together, and it basically reads like a short story of itself. And I think it's true because I think if you do this exercise properly, where each question you really dive into like specific moments, specific memories, and really flush it out and find the kind of the narrative, each question almost reads like a little flash fiction. Hello there. So I thought I would just close off this vlog outside. I'm really happy with what I wrote yesterday. Didn't actually really know where I was going. I was at a point where I was like, okay, I feel like I have a lot of things in motion, but I don't really know what tangibly happens next. I did what I think is a very good thing to do if you're in that situation, which is to just kind of start writing it out. I'll pop up a screenshot of what that looked like for me. I basically just started writing out everything that I had in motion. So what had just happened between characters, how this had furthered their relationship, what needed to be followed up on, the state of various threads. If you're stuck, like, it always helps to just write it out really simply, and that really helped, and that very quickly gave me an idea of what I wanted to happen next. So I kind of had a few relationships I wanted to follow up on, and I kind of felt like the best way to do that would be to have a scene with the whole family. I've actually only had one scene with the whole family, and it's a really scene I didn't really like, and I know I needed more of that. And the scene actually ended up developing in a really different way than I envisioned when I first started thinking about it. I was gonna have them have like a family like games night, because that's the kind of thing my protagonist would absolutely hate. And I also thought it would be a really good way to observe the family dynamic. I wanted a chance for Rowan to observe Cody and Suze's relationship. As the scene went on, I ended up having Cody get frustrated and leave, have this boil into like an argument between Suze and Cody. That was not at all how I planned that scene to go at all. Initially, what I had planned was, one thing that I know about this chapter is that there's something Rowan needs to steal. And so I was actually gonna have Rowan excuse themselves from the game to go steal this thing. But as the scene went on, this games night scene, there was so much conflict there that I decided to play that out fully. And I'm like way deeper into this book than I thought I was. Didn't really feel like I'd made as much progress as I'd made, because there was a really long section from about the 10K mark to the 20K mark. I didn't really like anything I wrote. And so it didn't feel like I'd made any progress. So I think I just like didn't log that as progress in my mind. But I am 30K into the book. It's time actually to start having bigger disruptions between these characters. It's time to start pulling these relationships apart and having things start to derail. You know, this is one reason why I discovery write, because most of the time, the way scenes unravel when I haven't planned them is a lot more interesting than the way that I plan them. I would say that I write quite intuitively. Trying to plot things consciously, I find is a poor strategy for me, who tends to have like the most interesting things emerge from my subconscious understanding of the story. And so I just don't like to put up too many constraints for myself in the draft, or else I find that it doesn't give room for those subconscious things to emerge. So yeah, scene didn't unfold how I planned, but I'm really happy that it didn't, because the way that it unfolded was a lot more compelling and had a lot more conflict, and I think actually achieved what I wanted and above and beyond. I have a really clear idea for the next scene that I want to happen. It is just the best thing to be feeling like called to write and immersed in the story, and like the story is a living thing that is in my brain and is unfolding even when I'm not really trying. That was not happening previously, and I was getting really dejected because it was like I couldn't form that connection. But now that I have formed that connection, the story is starting to write itself. It feels more effortless, and you know, obviously I need to every once in a while sit down and kind of get things in order, but for the most part it kind of has its own sense of momentum, its own sense of life. You know, I was worried that this wouldn't last, and obviously there will be more ups and downs. Maybe for people who zero draft or fast draft and write a first draft in a couple weeks, they can just do it all on and up, but I am not a fast drafter. I slow draft. Obviously going to be many ups and downs in that process, and you have to embrace that, especially if you're committing to a discovery writing process like me. The beauty of that, for me, of my process, which I love, of discovery writing and doing very detailed first drafts, is when you get to that point where the story is writing itself and it feels so rich and so alive in your mind. You can kind of experience the story in real time. It feels really alive. It's writing itself. It's pulling you in. It's like compelling you to write. That's finally happening. You know, I said that I was worried that this wouldn't last, and I was worried that this was just like a blip. Feels like sustained momentum. The book is bringing me that fulfillment that I really wanted. One reason this was so disappointing is because I haven't had a book to draft in a year and a half. For me, drafting a book is very fulfilling. You know, I don't have much going on in my life. I've had the same job for 4 years. I was just starting to feel very bored and burned out and like not really progressing in my life. I was hoping that a novel draft would be that thing for me, and so then when it wasn't, it was extra disappointing, because it felt like something that I needed for my own fulfillment, for my own happiness, and now it is being that thing. So that's really amazing. So I just wrote like 2,300 words, and I don't just write over 2,000 words in a day all the time. And it was just one of those great days of writing where the words just kept flowing. I only stopped writing because it got super late. It's like 10:30. The kind of writing that I've been wanting from this book since I started it, and I don't think I've had a day of writing like that. Maybe in the very beginning. I was really happy with how the scene turned out. I really went into a backstory, Suze's backstory, which I honestly hadn't really thought of at all. Like, I think in a previous clip I talked about how I kind of like to write for the most part with the limits of my narrator. So I kind of like to stay fairly limited to what my narrator knows, just because I feel like that immersion helps me. You know, it's like I'm really experiencing the story as the protagonist does, because I feel like that keeps their emotions and reactions the most accurate, because I'm not clouded by like more knowledge of the story than they are. Sometimes though I do get outside that. I'm gonna do that with some of the characters when I go do some character development for them, which I meant to start today, but the writing was going so well. Got to the part where I was gonna have to start diving into Suze's backstory. This was just a scene where Rowan and Suze are just talking. You know, I wanted to go deeper than just have Suze tell a story about how she and Cody met. I really wanted to get into her backstory, and there was a moment where I was like, I don't really know where I'm going with this, but once I started like following that thread and unraveling that thread of her past, I loved where it went. That knowledge now, from my perspective, but maybe also from Rowan's perspective, really makes what is going to happen later so much more complicated. And it's one of those things where it's like, it makes at least me, and hopefully the audience also, understand better why she does what she does later in the book, but I think it also makes it sadder. For a backstory that I hadn't really thought of, and I'm not good at character backstory, okay? It's something that I'm actually really not good at. It's like I can come up with interesting things that are happening during the narrative, but I can't just do that if it's in the past. I don't really know. Maybe that's because I'm a pantser, and so I have to like write stories to figure out what they are, and so it's hard for me to just come up with like an interesting narrative in the past because I didn't write it. Well, this is all making sense of why I'm bad at backstory. I feel like that scene just really added such interesting texture to her character. I think it's a scene that pulls a lot of weight, and you know, comparing that scene to scenes from the section of the book where I was really struggling, the scenes there felt really thin. They didn't really add any texture. We didn't really learn things that would continue to have an effect on the story, but this is like probably one of the most impactful scenes in terms of the repercussions of this knowledge, really deep implications on this relationship, on both characters, on the story. Considering that I sat down with no idea where I was going, and I was actually thinking I'd probably just write a little bit. Couldn't be more happy with this turn of events and how I went from the depths of woe to the type of writing that is like why I write, you know? Like, this is why I write, to have those days of writing where the words are just like flowing. I feel so excited because I'm experiencing, like, it's all a surprise to me, and so I'm excited by how it's unfolding, and it's kind of thrilling. I feel like I really gotten to the point where this is what I wanted from this book. I'm starting to kind of love writing this book the way that I love writing Honey Vinegar and the way that I love writing Holding a Ghost, which is like what I really wanted. And as I'm enjoying it more and I get deeper into the story, I'm starting to feel more confident about the book. Insecurities that I had about it and whether it was worth committing to, those are starting to fade, and I'm starting to feel like this can be something really great because I'm seeing it actually turn into something good rather than being this like very bland not interesting, poorly written, whatever it was for a bit there. It's turning into something that I'm actually like proud of and excited by. That's all for this video. I will see you guys in part 3 for the rest of NaNoWriMo. Please let me know how your nano is going, and I'll see you guys in another video. Bye!